Food security during these challenging times is the topic of today's Rambling Life Coach radio show. I'm your host, Armin Dupuy, and in this show, we're going to talk about the best food to stockpile for storage long term, because everyone is suffering from food insecurity right now, and there's a real chance it's going to get a lot worse. So I'm going to talk about food security and its importance. What is your household food security status? After all, what is food security, and what's the best long-term food storage items? Because no matter what the politicians are telling you, this pandemic is not going to be over anytime soon, and the same goes for unemployment. But the worst part, from a food security point of view, is that North America has entered a major depression, which is going to affect the well-being of everyone for at least the next decade or so, and especially food security in the U.S. That's reality. And food and water security is essential for your survival. So it's important to know how to protect your food security. And I'll be doing a special show on your water and heart disease. So keep an eye out for it, because you're going to want to know this. So in the show, I'm going to give you all kinds of tips and tricks about sustainable food security, food access, and maybe more importantly, how to achieve food security, how to secure a long-term food supply even if the store shelves are empty. And I'm not selling any kind of food product here, so you can relax. It's not about any one thing, as I'm going to cover many items in this show. Now, they won't all apply in your particular circumstances, but most of them will. So you're going to want to stay listening until the end. As always, stay focused, eliminate all distractions, and you might just want to grab a pen and paper, because like I said, this show is not about any one particular subject, but about many ideas which you can implement immediately. Now, I'm going to share many secrets with you, but before I begin, remember to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified, because I'm planning to do more shows on food security based on your comments and questions. So let's get started. If you want to survive the coming food shortage in this pandemic, the most important factor is between your ears, because you have to immediately begin to think differently, and here's the first step. Let's shift our thinking from food security to nutrition security and how to get the most bang for your buck. It's like I used to tell my students in my weight loss classes. Don't go shopping for food. Instead, go shopping for nutrition. That's the first step. The best long-term food storage is not to fill up your freezer for long-term meat storage, because what if the power goes out for a couple of weeks or more because of a little thing like a hurricane or a terrorist attack, or the power plant closes down because too many employees are sick? So the food would be all gone, along with the good money you spent for it. These are today's realities. Now, don't worry about protein. I'm going to come to that. Sure, you can stock up on all the food you normally buy, if they're available. But what if next week the shelves are bare like they were early in 2020? And a lot of these foods will only keep for so long. So again, we need a slight change in consciousness during these challenging times. It's not about what you like in food, but what you need in nutrition. We're talking survival here. Now, don't freak out at the foods which I'm going to recommend for short and long-term food storage, because as you're about to discover, these foods are going to be very multi-purpose in a way that you probably didn't think about. So what are the solutions to food insecurity? Let's get back to basics. Sure, if you have the money, you can stock up on canned goods and dried cereals and so on and so forth, but there is another and better way. Your basics are nuts, seeds, and grains. For example, grains have been known to last for 15 to 20 years in storage. So it does give you long-term food storage. And let's look at the options. What you can do here will totally depend on your own personal circumstances. I was lucky, because very early it became clear to me that things were going to go down south. Seriously. And I was already semi-prepared. I had a grain mill, which I hadn't used for probably a decade, but it still worked. So I could make my own flour. I also had a little hand mill which could turn oat grain into rolled oats. if you can afford it, you should buy yourself a grain mill if you don't already have one. There are lots of them on the market, and if you do a little bit of search on Google, you could probably find a decent one for $300 to $500. Now, my hand mill for making rolled oats broke down, and I found an alternative solution, a simple coffee grinder. And there are many on the market. Just look around. So just by having a simple coffee grinder, you can make a very nutritious porridge from a variety of grains, not just oats. Now, personally, I haven't experimented with other grains so far, but I usually grind up a 50-50 blend of oats and buckwheat, and I'll come to the importance of buckwheat in a moment. Now, my little coffee grinder will grind it into a fine powder if I want, but that wouldn't be very practical for making bread because of quantity. But I can see grinding up enough to make pancakes for myself, although I'm using flour from my grain mill at the moment since I have one. Now, I live exactly 3 miles from the center of a small town of 3,400 people. And now this is important. There are 2 types of food suppliers in America. Those that supply the supermarkets and those that supply the industrial market like restaurants, airlines, bakeries, etc. But here's the problem. It's packaging. The supermarket suppliers are set up with their equipment to sell by the pound for the consumer. It could be a pound of dried beans or a 5-10 pound bag of flour, for example. The restaurants and bakeries are buying their flour by the 50-pound bag or so. And since many restaurants are closed down and many people are not flying, etc., their suppliers have an oversupply. And since people are eating all that food at home, some of the store shelves are going empty. So depending on your supermarket, some of the dried goods you would want to stock up on are not available because other people are stocking up also. So what's the solution? Simple. Buy from the supply chain that has an oversupply. Now, in my town, I have 2 good-sized supermarkets, but I also have a mom-and-pop bulk store, and they buy their grains and legumes from the same supply chain as the restaurants and bakeries. Again, they don't buy by the pound, but by the 50-pound bag. So I went to the bulk store, picked up on a few items that I would, so that I would have at least a short-term supply, and made sure that I could still order by the bag as I had done that in the past. Actually, shortly after, they closed down the bulk store, and they are still closed as I record this because of the pandemic. But they established a very nice system. You know, for example, if I want to buy a new bag of grains, for example, of whatever, I phone in my order by Tuesday, as they order their supplies first thing Wednesday morning and get it the next afternoon. When I go to pick it up, I simply show my credit card through the window of their front door, they check it through for my order, and then I drive around to the back and the guy drops the bags into my trunk and off I go. Now in the first 2 months, here's what I wound up ordering. A 55-pound bag of wheat, 44 pounds of oats, 50 pounds of buckwheat, 22 pounds of rye, 55 pounds of spelt, and 22 pounds of lentils. That's actually a 10-kilo bag. We work in kilograms in Canada, and that's why the odd numbers on the poundage. Now, if I didn't see the inside of a store for a year, I could still eat in a healthy way. So let's look at it. I've got 5 grains, which I can grind into flour and make bread and all the other things you can make with flour, like pancakes, etc. And by the way, it's all organic. Also, because I'm using the whole grain and grinding it myself just before I make my bread, I'm getting the whole grain, not the crap flour you can buy in the store. But that's another story. And I am experimenting with different combinations of flours for my bread, and so far I've only tried the oat and buckwheat combinations for my porridge. Now, buckwheat is probably your most versatile because you can grind it into a flour, make breads, rolls, pancakes, and a bit more rough ground for porridge, but also you can grow it easily as a microgreen. Now you have fresh greens, and I'll come to that in a moment. As a matter of fact, I just sprouted some, and they're looking pretty good right now. Actually, buckwheat is not a grain, but a seed, and it's also totally gluten-free. Gluten-free! Now here's something else. Buckwheat is a complete protein, where most grains are not. Plus, buckwheat is cheaper to buy than the more exotic grains, which are also complete proteins, like quinoa and amaranth, for example. Now here's a very important side note on protein. I've read that even a professional athlete only had to consume 20 grams of protein after a good workout. Now, I'm inclined to kind of believe that because the people who were making that statement were actually selling a protein powder. So they would not minimize your needs. They would blow it up, if anything, to make more money. So if you're an average person, you probably need a whole lot less than that. Follow the money. I mean, who tells you that you need huge amounts of protein to survive? The meat industry, of course, and the fact that commercial meats are killing people does not matter to them. So let me destroy the protein myth once and for all. You need protein, no ifs or buts about it. However, when in your life do you need to consume the most protein relative to your body weight? Think about it. Common sense here. The time in your life when you need the most protein, absolutely, is when you are growing at the fastest possible rate. And that's a baby. Think about it. As a baby is when you grow at the fastest possible rate. And here's the kicker. What is the absolute number one best food for a baby? I mean, number one, no exceptions? Mother's milk, of course. And if the mother is healthy, a baby can thrive for 1 to 2 years or more just on mother's milk alone. And here's a $64,000 question. What percentage of protein is in mother's milk? What is it? Any idea? On average, 4 to 5%. And with that, it provides all of your fast-growing nutritional needs for protein. So why would you need to consume more than that, like 40 or 50% of your meals being protein, when you're already fully grown? So a bit of a rethink here might be in order. And meat is one of the most expensive foods out there because of supply and demand. And demand has been created by the meat and dairy industry by convincing you and brainwashing you that you need this huge amount of protein. It's actually quite unhealthy that way. So smarten up, realize that you don't need it, and you save a huge pile of money. Or if you're really low on money, you don't need to waste it on protein that you don't need. Now, personally, I'm not a vegetarian. I still eat some meat, but yet very little. Very little. Now, let's move on to lentils. Lentils are legumes, cousins to beans, chickpeas, soybeans, and peanuts. But they are not complete proteins, and that's why you always hear about beans and rice, because together they have the amino acids that the other one is missing, so that you have a complete protein. Again, very versatile. There are tons of ways to cook lentils and lots of recipes on the internet. Personally, I'll always add it to my soups and stews together with white rice, because brown rice, you think it's more healthy, but brown rice has a lot of arsenic in it, but next to none, comparatively speaking, in white rice. But you still get to balance your proteins. Now, I'm not looking for the nutritional value of white rice here, just for the balance of amino acids with my lentils to give me that complete protein. That's it. And you don't need much, like I said. Also, lentils are really easy to sprout, and they taste delicious. And you can grow them as microgreens, the same as buckwheat. So, a short side note on sprouting here. Sprouting is easy, and you can also greatly increase the amount of nutrition that was in the original seed. That's free nutrition. I don't recall which vitamin it was and which seed it was way back quite a few years ago, but by sprouting the seeds, I found out that one vitamin, for example, was increased by 500%. Now, the other vitamins were less, but still significant, and probably the easiest to sprout for a beginner would be mung beans and lentils. And that's enough about sprouting, because that could be a whole show by itself or even a video. Now, the same thing with microgreens. But there are tons of good videos on YouTube telling you all about microgreens so that you can have a fresh supply of greens without having to depend on the supermarket, because you can store it as grains, right? And by the way, I had also ordered a 22-pound bag of Himalayan pink salt from my bulk store. And that should do me for the next 5 or 10 years, I was thinking. But now that I'm observing how much I'm using, and I use a fair bit of salt, I think I'm good for 20 years. Now, while on the subject of salt, regular table salt is crap. And I don't buy sea salt anymore because the oceans are way too polluted. And so, Himalayan pink salt, on the other hand, has a lot more minerals in it, and it comes from the oceans from millions of years ago, so it is relatively unpolluted. So this gives you an idea about the best long-term survival food during the pandemic and beyond, because the economic fallout from this is not going to be very pretty. To sum it up, call up your local bulk store or health food store and find out what you can order by the large bag. Then, if supplies are available, get yourself a grain mill and a coffee grinder if you don't already have one. So I hope that I've been able to point you in the right direction to secure a long-term food supply. And you do want to stockpile food in a pandemic, which can keep for years without spoiling. That's the best food security, long-term storable food. By buying in bulk like that, you'll also save a lot of money, and you don't have to worry about a power outage. Your food storage items will depend on your circumstances, your finances, and what's available locally for you in long-term emergency food. So, the best long-term food security is the stuff that you can store and grow. Now, in this show, I've only covered the tip of the iceberg, and future shows on this subject will depend, as I said earlier, on your comments and questions. Now, if you like this show, give me a thumbs up to let me know. And if you didn't like the show, leave a comment and tell me how I can improve. And remember to subscribe, ring the bell, and more importantly, share these shows with the people you love and care about and on your social media platforms, because you might just be helping someone else to survive. And your financial support for this channel is what's going to keep the doors open, as I'm hoping to keep all of my shows and videos commercial-free for your enjoyment and information, so that you don't get distracted when you're paying attention to something. You learn faster that way. So you'll find a donation link in the text below, and I thank you for supporting me. Now, you can listen to the next show, which I recommend, by clicking on the card above, or one of my shows selected especially for you by YouTube by clicking on the card below. Until next time, stay safe. This is Armin Dupuy, signing off.